Text Complexity, a presentation by Jasmine Cole. After reviewing these slides and participating in the activities within this presentation, you should become more familiar with text complexity and how it relates to college and career readiness and Destination 2025. You should also be able to use the text complexity triangle to determine whether text is complex. And lastly, you will be able to explore and also practice strategies to improve how your students comprehend and respond to complex text. First, before I begin to discuss text complexity, I believe it is important to briefly touch on Destination 2025. Many of you sitting here are aware of Destination 2025. As a brief reminder, this ambitious 10-year plan will greatly improve the quality of education in all Shelby County schools. Some of the main goals of this plan are as follows. 80% of seniors will graduate and will be college or career ready. Also, 90% of students will graduate on time, and 100% of graduates who are college or career ready will enroll in post-secondary schools. As I previously mentioned, this goal is ambitious, but it is obtainable. Shelby County Schools has also defined 5 priorities that will be necessary in completing this plan. These priorities include strengthening early literacy, improving post-secondary readiness, developing teachers, leaders, and central office, expanding high-quality school options, and mobilizing family and community partners. Briefly, I want you to jot down on the handout that I have given to you a few ways that we as educators can successfully achieve Destination 2025. I also want you to consider how we can prepare our students to become college or career ready. Think about your classroom and how you are currently preparing your students for success. You might have jotted down these bulleted points. As educators, most of these bulleted points may be no-brainers. You know that each student learns in a different way, and in order for you to be able to successfully teach all your students, you must incorporate differentiated instruction into your daily lesson planning. Being flexible and knowledgeable about your students and their abilities is important for an effective teacher. You must also spend time establishing and practicing effective teaching strategies. This could include giving immediate feedback and administering assessments on a regular basis. On a daily basis, you must create and implement lesson plans with clear objectives and lesson plans that are aligned with the Common Core standards. I'm quite sure that if I gave you more time, your list could easily fill up a full page. When teachers start to compile their list of ways to help students become more college and career ready, unfortunately, the concept of text complexity is often overlooked. Text complexity matters, and it also plays a huge role in accelerating student achievement in reading and reading comprehension. But why exactly is text complexity important? Consider these 2 quotes. The first one states, "Readers need a variety of well-written, accessible, highly engaging text in a variety of genres. Assuring a literate life for all students means making it possible for them to deeply understand genres, authors, illustrators, text formats, text purpose, and audience, as well as academic language." Think about that quote for a second. According to this quote, How does the level of text complexity directly correlate with college and career readiness and Destination 2025? A student's level of comprehension is directly related to how they are able to analyze complex text. Being able to understand genres, authors, illustrators, text formats, purpose, and audience are all ways that students can enhance the way that they comprehend text. The second quote is as follows: all students need access to complex ideas and content and to high-quality literature. Through engagement with complex texts, they build content knowledge that is important and comprehending both nonfiction and fictional text. The building of content knowledge is a very important skill for all students to learn, no matter their grade level. Even in kindergarten, students are able to attach meaning to storybooks and illustrations. In science classes, students are able to build on their background knowledge and expertise. All of these skills are important when it comes to helping students become college and career ready. A part of becoming ready for the post-secondary world is being able to comprehend complex text. The statistics from ACT are alarming. These statistics were derived and taken from the ACT website. The complexity of text that students are expected to handle from kindergarten through 12th grade has eroded. High school textbooks have declined in all subject areas over several decades. The average length of sentences in kindergarten through 8th grade have declined from 20 to 14 words. The vocabulary demands for students have declined. 8th grade textbooks have become the equivalent to 5th grade books, and 12th grade anthologies have become equal to former 7th grade books. These statistics are alarming because when an average person thinks about students and the way that they advance academically, you tend to assume that as they grow older, they are expected to be able to read more complex texts. According to ACT, the exact opposite is expected in secondary schools. Now, on the contrary, the complexity of college-level texts and career texts have either remained steady or have increased. Lexile scores of college textbooks have not decreased in any block of time since 1962, but they have increased. The vocabulary difficulty of newspapers has remained stable. Since 1930, the word difficulty of scientific journals and magazines have increased. The post-secondary world expects for our students to be able to understand and comprehend texts that they may be considered more difficult, but in our elementary, middle, and high schools, we are not preparing our students to be successful once they graduate from secondary schools. Text complexity involves all text and encompasses all grades and all content areas. Students graduate from establishing meaning from storybooks and illustrations to comprehending informational text that they may encounter in science and math classes. Students should be constantly challenged so that their comprehension levels are constantly being enhanced. Practice with texts of differing complexity levels will only increase their level of comprehension. Text complexity fosters and encourages lifelong literacy skills. Text complexity is relevant to all teachers and to all readers. Now that we know why complexity of text is important and how it relates to college and career readiness, let's discuss exactly what text complexity is. Consider this triangle. The components that define text complexity are quantitative measures, qualitative measures, and reader and text considerations. The quantitative measures of the text complexity triangle include readability and other scores of text complexity, often best measured by computer software. The qualitative measures of the text complexity triangle include the levels of meaning, structure, language conventionality, and clarity, and knowledge demands, often best measured by an attentive human reader. Lastly, reader and task considerations include the background knowledge of the reader and also their motivation, interest, and complexity generated by task assigned. These considerations are often best made by educators employing their professional judgment. The quantitative measures of text complexity are defined by assessing word length, word frequency, sentence length, and text cohesion. These quantitative measures can be determined by a computer program. The number one objective in increasing text complexity is to build capacity for all students at each grade level. Sentence length is determined by averaging the number of words in each sentence in a selection. Word frequency refers to how often the same words appear in a text. The word length of the text and text cohesion are also factors that are considered when determining text complexity. When dissecting text to determine text complexity, the use of qualitative measures to determine text complexity involves the reader making a knowledgeable decision about the complexity of a text in terms of one or more factors and include a human reader making an informed decision about how difficult the text is. There are 4 measures that we can use. The first is the level of meaning or purpose. When asking this question, consider if a text or passage has one or more levels of meaning. A mystery novel or science fiction passage may contain different levels of meaning. An informational text is typically more straightforward and therefore easier to comprehend. When it comes to structure, texts of a lower complexity have a more simple and easier to follow structure. Texts that have a higher level of complexity have a more unconventional structure, and the text may utilize the use of flashbacks or flash forwards, and the text may not present events in a chronological order. Text of a lower complexity may feature language that is more literal, clear, and conversational. These elements make a text easier to comprehend. Text of a higher complexity may exhibit language that is more figurative and ambiguous. It may also feature language and vocabulary that is unfamiliar to the reader. And lastly, text that does not assume facts or the life experiences of their readers is typically easier to read and comprehend than text that makes many assumptions about a reader's life experience and their background knowledge. The variables that comprise reader and task considerations are more specific to the individual readers. These variables can include motivation, knowledge, and past experiences. The purpose of the text and the questions that may arise from reading the text are important in deciding whether a text is more or less appropriate for a particular student. These are some things to consider when thinking about reader and task consideration. Reader and task considerations are typically measured by a teacher. A teacher uses their knowledge of the student's abilities and their particular expertise to determine the complexity of a text. A match between the task and the text is considered, and lastly, does the task and the text match the student and the student's ability? Right now, we are going to look at a few brief texts so that we can identify some qualitative factors that are often used to determine the complexity of the text. First, I will show you a text, then I will analyze it. After I show you the qualitative factors that I was able to identify, I will then ask you and a partner to read a different text and to come up with some qualitative aspects of the text that you feel will make the text more or less complex for the students. Right now, we are not going to focus on the appropriate grade level for the text, but our goal is to understand how qualitative factors can increase or decrease the complexity of a text. Both texts are included on the handout. I will give you a few minutes to read it to yourselves. First, let's discuss the intended meaning or purpose. The text discusses and describes elements of the Revolutionary War. There are many things that are present for the readers. Themes like friendship and loyalty are more clear to the reader, while there are some themes like morality and the impact of war on relationships that are more ambiguous. Based upon this analysis of the text, I have determined that this text is very complex. The structure of this text is somewhat complex. The text is told using the first-person narrative, and it gives a chronological telling of events that occurs when the rebels vandalize and search Katie's home. The context of the narrative is set by the author, providing the reader with context knowledge about past events. The text alludes to the Boston Tea Party, so that we are aware that this narrative is set during the colonial period in U.S. history. This narrative does include illustrations that I have not provided, but know that these illustrations help the author to establish the tone and the mood of the text. Based upon this analysis, I have concluded that this text is somewhat complex. The narrative includes language from the time frame that may make the text more complex for some readers. This text also features sentences that are lengthy and complex. Sentences like must be mama sighed and sat down to tea, must be all this trouble and fighting, why it makes me skittish as a newborn calf, all this marching and talking, these letters your papa speaks of, that the tea they dumped in the harbor. There is also some unfamiliar vocabulary and figurative language that is used. The language conventionality and the clarity of this text makes this text very complex for some readers. To fully comprehend this narrative, a reader must have some prior knowledge about the time period, which is during the American Revolution. Some aspects of this narrative are relatable, but some readers would have to have some type of background that they can use to connect with other aspects of the narrative, like segregation and war. Now that I have modeled for you how to gauge the qualitative measures of a text, I want you to practice it yourself with a partner. First, I will read the passage out loud. While I'm reading, consider the 4 qualitative measures. Discuss and write down the level of complexity from simple, somewhat complex, complex, and very complex. With each of the 4 measures, discuss why you chose that complexity level and list specific reasons. Use the following slide to guide you. The text is as follows. Once upon a time, in a gloomy castle on a lonely hill, where there were 13 clocks that wouldn't go, there lived a cold, aggressive duke and his niece, the Princess Cerelinda. She was warm in every wind and weather, but he was always cold. His hands were as cold as his smile, and almost as cold as his heart. He wore gloves when he was asleep, and he wore gloves when he was awake, which made it difficult for him to pick up pins or coins or kernels of nuts, or to tear the wings from nightingales. He was 6 feet 4 and 40, glittered through a monocle, which made half of his body seem closer to you than the other half. He had lost one eye when he was 12, for he was fond of peering into nests and layers in search of birds and animals to maul. One afternoon, a mother shrike had mauled him first. His nights were spent in evil dreams, and his days were given to wicked schemes. Wickedly scheming, he would limp and cackle through the cold corridors of the castle, planning new impossible feats for the suitors of Cerelinda to perform. He did not wish to give her hand in marriage, since her hand was the only warm hand in the castle. Even the hands of his watch and the hands of all 13 clocks were frozen. They had all frozen at the same time on a snowy night 7 years before, and after that it was always 10 to 5 in the castle. Travelers and mariners will look up at the gloomy castle on the lonely hill and say, "Time lives frozen there. It's always then, and it's never now." Now take a moment to read the passage to yourself. And after you're done reading, I want you to consider with your partner the qualitative measures of the passage and the levels of complexity. Let this slide guide you. On the left hand, you have qualitative measures, which include levels of meaning or purpose, structure, language conventionality and clarity, and knowledge demands. And on the right side, we have our levels of complexity. We have simple, somewhat complex, complex, and very complex. And I will give you a few minutes to complete this activity. Now that you have finished, what are some ways that greater text complexity can be introduced into your classroom? If students cannot decode all the words in the text, they need to assess the complex language and concept in other ways. For example, through digital recordings or teacher read-alouds. Often the texts teachers read aloud to students are too difficult for most of the students in the class to read independently, especially in the primary grades. However, students can benefit greatly from the experience of hearing, thinking, talking, and writing about these texts. These instructional settings may be whole class read-alouds lessons as well as small group book clubs that include in-depth discussion with peers. This quote touches on various methods that an educator can use to assess more complex language and content in order to make them more college and career ready. How can you help students define meaning in complex text? And these are skills and tips that you can use starting your very next class period. One way is to give them a variety of texts like graphic, comics, science fiction, and informational text. Being introduced to many different types of text will build a more well-rounded reader. Also, teach students skills to help them decipher text that may be above their comprehension level. Help them to gather context clues or to use their background knowledge to analyze text. Both of these skills will help them to be able to deal with complex text. Also, introduce more informational text into your curriculum. For example, a math teacher can include in their geometry lesson an informational text about the Pythagorean theorem. A science teacher can make accessible to their students informational text that directly correlates to their particular lessons. Teachers can create a diagram that students have easy access to. Create a step-by-step account of how to break down complex text. Having this information hanging in the classroom will make the task of deciphering difficult text more simple and less intimidating. Also, when thinking about how to introduce more complex text in your classroom, think about the TEM framework. The teacher effective measures. Consider the teacher effective measures to help you to consider how you can use text complexity to make your students more college and career ready. These 4 steps include planning. Teachers should know their students and their specific learning needs. Teachers should teach objective-driven lessons. Teachers should also take the time to reflect on and adjust their progress. And lastly, teachers should cultivate positive and effective learning environments. And also, here are some skills you can use to help your students to decipher complex text. Have them to question what they are reading. Help them to make inferences and to make interpretations. Teach your students how to paraphrase and to track an argument or thought. And lastly, layer text so that students can layer meaning. This helps students to dig deeper by comparing structure, vocabulary, content, and concepts. Now, let's go back to our objectives for this presentation. Our goals were to become familiar with text complexity and how it relates to CCR and Destination 2025. We should be able to use the text complexity triangle in determining whether text is complex. And last, we should be able to explore and practice strategies to improve text complexity in the classroom. Do you think that we have accomplished these goals? What questions do you have about text complexity that weren't answered during this presentation? To conclude this presentation, we will do a brief second reflection. Before we begin this reflection, does anyone have any more questions about text complexity? I want you to take a few minutes to jot down some takeaways that you've gotten from this presentation. What else do you need to know about text complexity in order to increase it in your classroom? What can you do to improve text complexity in your classroom starting tomorrow or next week or the next time that you enter into the classroom? And what are some challenges or problems that you think that you might encounter, and what are some solutions to those problems? Let's also take a few minutes to think about goals and ways that we can improve text complexity in our classroom. Here is a personal challenge and a goal. Make an effort to bridge the gap for your students by making 20% of your classroom able to read grade level challenging text. What can you do to accomplish this goal? And also, think about some challenges that you may come across when trying to accomplish this goal. And lastly, I know you're not going to be too happy about this, but we've got some homework. I want you to gather a text that you use regularly in your classroom, or a text that you plan on using in an upcoming lesson. Consider these 2 questions. Is the text the appropriate level for challenging students to think critically? Is it too complex, or is it not complex enough? Does your text help students complete the requirements of Destination 2025? Will it help them to become a more well-rounded reader? And I thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sitting through this presentation. As a follow-up, I would like for you to leave your name and your email address. I will post the presentation, and I will send you the links to the research that I have included in the presentation, and I will also follow up with you guys to see if you've been able to reach your goal and how you've been able to employ some of these strategies that we discussed today. Thank you.